This is Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Adam Carolla.
Yeah, get it on. Got to get on. No choice but going to mandate. Get it on. And welcome to the best hour or so in the universe. It's Reasonable Doubt. I'm Adam Carolla. That's Mark Garrigus in New York City. So where do you want to begin, Mark?
Yesterday on Beyond, Gary and I started talking about the frightened, the case of the foul-mouthed cheerleader, which we didn't, I don't think, clarified, was argued at the U.S. Supreme Court. But I really, really enjoy this case. This is a cheerleader named Brandy Levy, I think is her name. Gary can correct me if I'm wrong.
Says yes.
And goes to school where, in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Did not make the, what was it, JV?
She did not make varsity. She was a JV cheer team member the year before. She was trying to make varsity, and she found out on a Saturday she had not made varsity, and that someone with less tenure than her had jumped her to join varsity.
And subsequently has made varsity, right?
Brandy, I believe so.
Okay, but so she did as all good kids did. She went on a rant on Snapchat, right, Gary?
Yeah, she posted a photo with her and a friend at a convenience store. They were both flipping off the camera. And on Snapchat, you can lay text over your picture. And I believe it said F school, F cheer, F everything, something to that effect.
So the daughter of the coach, and I can only imagine what Adam's going to say. The daughter of the cheerleading coach shows it to her mom. The mom gets the school. What did they do? They
suspended her from all cheer operations for a year. And Adam, just in case you don't know, Snapchat is set to disappear. So this picture would have been up for 24 hours and then it would have gone away forever. But some kid did the I just thought you should know and screenshot it and showed it to her mom.
Oh, this
officious cheerleading coach has this and I guess the procedural history, just so I can bring you up to speed here, is she gets the Third Circuit to rule that, Gary, what was the exact, they said it was too harsh, basically.
I can tell you while you guys are looking up some of that data, there's sort of precedent for this in that, I mean, not at the Supreme Court, not legal precedent, but sort of sociological precedent. There was a story from about a year ago, I think, that there was a high schooler that when she got her driver's license, she did a Snapchat or she did a something where she said, you know, how do you like me now, my N-words kind of thing. She was basically quoting a rap song, essentially, and saying she got her driver's license. A student captured it, sat on it for like 3 years. And then when she was going to, I think, Tennessee to try out for the cheerleading squad in college, they released this. And then she got dumped from the cheerleading squad. So there's this scary history, or there is some precedent for people capturing stuff and then putting it out there and then getting students canceled from cheerleading squads.
So the Third Circuit said basically that that Tinker, which was the original case that about the black armbands back in the 60s or 70s,
69.
and declared that Tinker and its exception for disruptive speech do not apply off campus. Therefore, the Levy School had violated her rights. The fascinating part about this, so now you've got the Tinker case, which has said that that schools could discipline if it was disruptive to the school environment. You've got the Third Circuit saying it doesn't apply if it's off campus, basically. And then you've got an argument which makes some very strange bedfellows. Clarence Thomas took the position that he's done his historical research and minors don't have free speech. So he would just cut it off right there. This isn't First Amendment. Minors don't have the First Amendment right to free speech. So that's the end of that. Brett Kavanaugh, who, as some of you may know, is a coach. I forget what he coaches, but he coaches one of his daughter's teams.
Oh, it was so perfect because when he was doing the press conference after he was nominated, he was flanked by his daughter and his wife, and he was saying, you know, my greatest joy and my greatest achievement is not being, you know, nominated to the Supreme Court, but it's coaching my daughter's basketball team, with his arm around his wife, because he knew that the Democrats were going to call him a serial rapist in about 10 minutes. So if you look at that press conference, you're like, why is his teenage daughter standing next to him when he's doing this? Oh, he was trying to get out in front of this.
And he's doing, I'm reading some of this, as a judge and maybe as a coach and a parent too, it seems like maybe a bit of an overreaction by the coach, he told Lisa Blatt, who was the attorney representing the school. And then Justice Alito, starts reflecting his concern because, you know, part of what has happened here is what used to be kind of a liberal embracing of free speech has now become kind of a mantle on the right. And this was reflected in the amicuses. The amicuses are the friend of the court's brief. There were literally, I'm going to tell you, right-wing organizations called the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, Alliance Defending Freedom, the Life Legal Defense Foundation, America's for Prosperity. But we're also joined by a bunch of progressive groups, ACLU, who represents Levy, and civil rights attorneys were weighing in. And Alito asked her whether a student could be punished for failing to use a transgender classmate's proper name and pronouns. Blatt said basically yes. And that's Alito said, basically says, I'm really worried about how this is going to be implemented, which I think is a fair statement. And Breyer, who a lot of Democrats have been asking to resign so that Joe Biden can appoint his replacement, he said, I'm frightened to death of writing a standard in this case. And Roberts says, Chief Justice says, he was more, how do you even make a distinction between on and off campus speech? And Elena Kagan said similar stuff, that that cases involving bullying and other kinds of things. I think they may regret getting into this, is I guess my I don't know how they're, based on what's been reported as the justices' questions, which, you know, sometimes you can read a lot into, sometimes not, but it sure seems like, I don't know how they're going to cobble together 5 people who agree in this case.
Who's they when you said they
Supreme Court
are going to wish they didn't get into this?
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how where do you come down on this?
Listen, you're definitely talking to the wrong guy in terms of how I grew up, and I'm very sticks and stones, and this sort of clamp down on everybody's speech is insane, and I'll tell you why, because this is something that's been going on for a long period of time. God knows if there was a nanny cam on you and one of your friends out front of the 7-Eleven when you were 16, what the implications would be today. You know, so in my view, kids have been saying crazy shit their entire lives, since time immemorial. Kids have been bullying. Kids have been saying things. You know, it's the nature of being a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, just a young person. Now we have a technology that captures it. So before, the behavior didn't change. The behavior's gone all the way through. We're now capturing it. It's basically like, if you want to see pictures of the French-Indian War, you're going to see drawings of the French-Indian War. If you're going to want to see what's going on in Iraq, you're going to see high-def digital versions of what's going on in Iraq, but the war hasn't changed. You know, it's still men fighting. One is an old oil painting, and the other you can pull up on your iPhone. But the activity's the same. So in a weird way, because this technology is 10 minutes old, we're trying to prosecute people for something that has always existed.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because I remember years ago when texting started to become a thing, that a juvenile was in Inglewood Juvenile Court. I remember going there and being perplexed. A guy had told a classmate who had broken up with him or didn't want to date him, I forget what the lead up to it was. He had texted her or IM'd her or done something saying, sleep with one eye open.
Right.
And they prosecuted this kid as a juvenile for a terrorist threat. Back then, was what we called terrorist threat before we changed it to criminal threats. And I was just amazed by that, you know, that you could do that in terms of speech. I, you know, if I were to weigh in here, I think, you know, as much as people were kind of making fun of Clarence Thomas, the idea that somehow they're going to try to come up with a rule that as to this, I tend to agree with the chief on this. I don't know how they come up with a rule, how they enforce a rule. I mean, there's got to be a mechanism by which they can say we're going to punt and not really deal with this, because I think this is wading into way too close for either side, whether you're on the left or the right. I can give you examples for both, and I think there's a reason why there's so many amicuses in this case. If you start saying that the standard is we don't like this disruptive speech, well, if then what becomes disruptive? You can imagine if you're pro-life or pro-abortion, either one, depending on your geographical area, could be disruptive. If you, for instance, have a situation where you're going to the Elena Kagan questions about bullying, that could be on campus, off campus, but they're going to say it would have a disruptive effect on campus. And I just don't think you can start doing this. I think you don't want to, and I've been waiting all episode for this. I don't think you want to tinker with Tinker. The previous case where they spoke on this, Tinker was kind of, you made a demarcation. It's either on campus or not. You start policing off campus because everything can be, as you said, because we've got technology now, and you could say, you can make a compelling argument, I think, that bullying can take place anywhere, and it's kind of enforced once you get to school, but there's a kind of a setup before you get to school. I think it's just a hornet's nest. I don't know why they got in the middle of this.
What do they? So how did they?
They haven't ruled yet.
They haven't ruled.
They're going to have. Yeah, they're going to. All of the people who have listened to it and have written about it and reported on it have come basically kind of the same conclusion. The court almost, you can almost see or hear or feel the regret in taking up this issue because it just has too many possibilities for disaster written all over it.
Shall we talk Rudy Giuliani?
Oh God, we were just talking about it here before I got in the podcast. He did a rather crazy interview, I guess last night on Tucker Carlson's show.
I saw it. Yeah.
Did you see it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's just plain wrong on the law. And I don't know what, I'm sitting here in New York City, and a lot of people have talked about just how bad they feel for him, how far he has kind of fallen, if you will, because, you know, he was revered here in this city post 9/11. And now he's just, I mean, the legacy of him is awful. One of the things I talked about with Gary yesterday is, which hasn't been reported on that much, is in connection with this, what I guess is the Foreign Agent Registration Act, FARA, as they call it. I think that's what the acronym stands for. They also executed a search warrant, which has been reported universally as on Victoria Toensing, who's a former U.S. attorney. I used to appear with her and her husband, Joe DeGeneva, back in the old days on the Geraldo shows, and has been apparently was interviewed by Trump at one point, she and Joe DeGeneva. But if you believe the reporting, Trump thought that they were too dumpy to be his lawyers in terms of their appearance, too slovenly, which I always got kind of a kick out of.
I haven't seen Joe DeGeneva pop up on any news shows in maybe 2 years. He used to frequently make the rounds.
Yeah, he was very, very pronounced. And in the reporting yesterday, they talked about her getting a search warrant. Well, her husband is Joe. Her business partner is Joe, unless there's another DeGeneva in the mix that I'm not aware of. There could be. I think there is another Toensing. But the fact is that I'm perplexed as to why she is the object of the search warrant and he's not mentioned in this.
Well, I watched a Rudy Giuliani interview on Tucker last night as we taped this. And I can tell you some of the things he said, and then maybe you can weigh in on some of his comments. One of the, in no particular order, one of the things he said is, he's had all this electronics. They served a search warrant that came at 6 a.m. They wanted to get his hard drives and electronics and things like that. He said that he had told the DOJ that he shall share this stuff with them anytime they want it, but they didn't want it. They weren't asking for it. He said he would come in and talk to them about this stuff, and they said, "We want you to come in and talk about everything." And he sort of said, "I'll just come in and talk about the matter at hand," according to him. So first things first, he says he's had all this stuff. He's been in communication. He's had it for 2 years, and they could have asked for it at any time.
What's interesting is that generally, as a general rule, the DOJ has to get clearance out of Maine Justice or give clearance out of Maine Justice before you can execute a search warrant on a lawyer's office or a lawyer's home because of the privilege issues. And just because you execute on a lawyer does not mean necessarily that the lawyer is a target of the investigation. Victoria Toensing's lawyer pointedly said she is not a target of the investigation. It still is strange to me if that's the case. Why go by way of a search warrant as opposed to a grand jury subpoena? Because you could issue a grand jury subpoena. They could have issued one on Rudy. They could have issued one on Victoria Toensing, and then they would presumably comply with the subpoena. There should, one would think, be some showing that would not be complied with, or that there's a fear that there would be a compromise of the evidence itself. So if you're saying, look, a lawyer is an officer of the court, if you issue a subpoena, the lawyer should comply with turning over his things subject to privilege and attorney-client communications. And presumably the Department of Justice believes that the lawyer is not going to comply, that there's some reason to believe that they are either going to obstruct or not turn it over or destroy evidence, which is interesting.
Giuliani also said he's had this stuff for 2 years. He could have destroyed it at any time, and the reason he didn't destroy it is because it's exculpatory and would help his case, the stuff that's on there.
Well, remember, part of the reason also sometimes that a search warrant is issued is that the prosecution already has the evidence. They've already assembled the evidence. He may not know it, but they may have gone to and issued a search warrant or a grand jury subpoena on whoever his carrier is on his phone. And his phone number is not too tough to get. He's butt dialed reporters repeatedly. So they would, if he's got an iPhone or if he's got an AT&T, for instance, as the carrier, they could have already subpoenaed that. They could have that in their back pocket. And the search warrant is to see whether or not he has destroyed something in the interim while he knew he was under investigation. And he should know this. I mean, at one point, he was the head of the Southern District of New York, number one. Number two, when he was head of the Southern District, he understands what obstruction investigations, how they operated. And so he may actually be closer to a shoe dropping than people are letting on. Maybe this may be the beginning of the end of the investigation as opposed to the beginning of the investigation.
Well, to speak to that, the other thing he said is that they had a warrant to basically look into the cloud and get his information already, so that they'd already had his information. I think he was saying that was basically a breach because there was some attorney-client stuff in there that they had helped themselves to without him knowing it.
Well, clearly, then that goes to what I was arguing. They get a warrant for the cloud, and they had it. Presumably, you would think that they would have segregated that information, notified his lawyer, and showed his lawyer what they seized so that the lawyer could present a privilege assertion and they could litigate that. Because if they didn't do that, then you've got a problem, potentially, if the prosecution looks at the stuff prior to having the ability to segregate privileged items. Clearly, he was operating or he was representing the president. So one would presume on his phone, if it's a smartphone at least, that he's got some kinds of privileged information that's on there, and that he could assert privilege over, unless they're going to allege a crime fraud exception. If there's a crime fraud exception, and that's the road they're going down, that's one way to pierce the attorney-client privilege.
The biggest bombshell probably of his interview, and he stated it before the Tucker Carlson interview, was that he had offered them the Hunter Biden hard drive and they declined to take it, which he's really trying to make some hay over. So he said it, I offered it to him twice. He went on to say that according to the provisions of the warrant, they would have had to take the Hunter Biden information as well, the hard drive as well. And he further said, how did they know what was on that hard drive? He said it was the Hunter Biden hard drive, but it could have been a bunch of information about Trump or anybody else.
Yeah, which I thought which is a very interesting take, because I think in his press release, or his lawyer's press release, he said, see, they believed me because they didn't take it because I said it was Hunter Biden's hard drive. I think that's very clever a way to put it. Who knows what the truth is there? If he did have hard drives, which he offered to them, which he said, look, none of my stuff is on there, but Hunter Biden's is, and they didn't take it, he may get some traction with that.
Well, what is the implication of that? First things first, he said, according to, I guess, the letter of the warrant, they're supposed to take all the electronic information. And the fact that they left something behind is almost a breach of or certainly the spirit of the warrant.
Correct. I mean, most search warrants that you will see will say authorize the seizure of any and all electronic devices. Extremely broad language.
Sure.
So that would be a correct statement.
So it would also make sense to me that he had the Hunter Biden hard drive or whatever in his possession, I'm assuming. Maybe he had it as an insurance card. You know, maybe he kept it and Giuliani is a lot of things. I don't think he's dumb, and I do think he's pretty experienced. I think you couldn't argue with his experience. He's definitely that's what a lot of people were talking about in New York City today, where I am, is that his pedigree, a resume or legacy at one point in time was pretty revered. And they called him America's mayor. He was lauded for how he brought back the city. This or that. He does have, though, something has happened to him, just observationally. I don't know him, but there has become kind of a cartoon-esque quality to him. I agree, but when he speaks, he's eloquent, and he doesn't miss much verbiage. Like, he's not bumbling and stumbling. He reminds me, though, of there's a lot of times that I'm intrigued by people who may not be hitting on all cylinders, and I'm intrigued by kind of the workings of their brain. And he's got kind of reminded me. We were talking today about another case, and I was quoting his argument when I think he was also in Pennsylvania, speaking of Pennsylvania, where he responded to the district court judge when he asked what level of scrutiny, and Rudy said the normal level, which I didn't know exists, that normal level of scrutiny. But so here's a hypothesis. Giuliani is morphed into something that resembles a cartoon, but he knows the legal system, and he also presumably would know when the spotlight of the legal system was focused on him. He couldn't have been overly surprised that there was a knock on the door at 6 a.m. to ask him to serve a warrant. He's been around too long.
Well, clearly he hired, in support of that thesis, he hired a well-respected criminal defense lawyer months and months, if not longer ago. So he knew he was in harm's way.
Right. So, again, it's kind of, we talk about a lot of people where you disagree with them or you don't like their bedside manner, but you can't just say that guy's an idiot. He's not an idiot. He had to know what was going on. He's savvy as it pertains to law. He worked with the same people, essentially, that are coming after him now for a long period of time. So the Hunter Biden hard drive, did he have that sitting out on top of his desk to say, if you come after me, and if you come after me, it's going to be under the Biden administration? And last time I checked, Hunter Biden has the same last name as Joe Biden. Did he have that just sitting around as what he thought was his get out of jail free card, or something that's going to help his case, knowing that if they serve this warrant and they took everything, they would have to take the Hunter Biden hard drive?
I could see that theory. Remember the whoever that computer store owner, fixer-upper, claimed he turned there was a story that he turned it over, the computer hard drive, over to Rudy's lawyer. So would Rudy's lawyer have given it to Rudy and say, here, if they execute a search warrant, you got this here? Trust me, I've seen crazier things in the justice system.
So Giuliani takes this hard drive, he makes it's at a place where he knows he can get to it, and then he gives the feds two choices: either take it with you, and now it's with the evidence that you'd collected, and it's going to have to be subjected to some scrutiny because it's electronics information that you had a warrant to receive, or if you pass on it, then that's going to say a lot about what your politics are and who sent you.
Correct. Correct. And I think and he put that out there in the statement yesterday. Gary may have the statement. I think I sent it to him.
It's the first thing he said. So I don't think that came to him at 6:15 in the morning. I think that was something he probably knew. He probably knew this scenario was going to happen.
There's another story today that made me also ponder. It was the story where the guy Greenberg, who is out of Florida, they released a letter or a communication between him and Roger Stone, who the president commuted and then I think pardoned, who's a longtime political operative. The letter from Greenberg basically says Matt Getz and he were paying for sex, including a 17-year-old or an underage. And he was trying to get a Stone to get him a pardon. And he was basically saying, if I get it, I'll give you $250,000 in Bitcoin, this or that. Well, we know Stone was pardoned, and presumably Trump didn't want to get anywhere near Matt Getz or Greenberg, given all of the Ghislaine Maxwell stuff. But interesting to me is why, given some of the pardons that Trump issued, why didn't he pardon Rudy Giuliani? And why didn't Giuliani? Why would you go to the lengths of having a Hunter Biden hard drive there when all you really needed as an insurance policy is just have the president pardon you? You knew that Southern District, presumably you knew Southern District was coming after you. It had been publicly reported, I believe, prior to Trump leaving office, that twice they'd sought search warrants on Rudy and twice Maine Justice had rejected them. So presumably that's one of the reasons why you had, under your theory, that they had the Hunter Biden hard drive. So why go through all that cloak and dagger stuff when you just, with the flick of a pen, you can get Trump to issue a pardon for you?
I wish I had an answer to that, but
seems like a very roundabout way that is, as you say, is an insurance policy. I can see it. It's an interesting theory. That theory has some traction, but wouldn't the easier way to get from point A to point B is to not have to worry about it and have? If Trump is pardoning Bannon, he's sure as who he had a rather public split with, and he's pardoning Stone and he's pardoning everybody else in the orbit. Why wouldn't he pardon Rudy Giuliani?
Well, here's from listening, there's another couple of beats from his interview. One was that he did not violate FARA, according to Giuliani. Giuliani didn't. He says he had it in his contract with, that he would do none of this foreign stuff. It's again, and also FARA's an interesting thing because it exists, but it's rarely enforced. But it's been enforced a lot lately.
We talked about it. The gentleman, a lawyer who I've got the utmost respect for and kind of legendary in legal circles, Greg Craig, former White House counsel, I think not once but twice, was prosecuted in Washington, D.C. and acquitted during the Trump administration for violation of FARA.
They say it's rarely prosecuted. They also say many people are in violation of it, many lobbyists. But one of the other things that Giuliani was saying, which I'll get into this conspiracy theory that I may have. I'll tease it. First, I'll tell you about our friends over at AsteraLabs.com. This podcast is sponsored by our friends at Astera Labs. Thought about trying CBD? Sure, but what brand or what dosage form is best? Astera Labs, easy to swallow tablets that provide consistent dosing and blister packaging that allows for convenient transport. Manufactured according to the FDA's current good manufacturing practices in a facility that is GMP compliant and tested by a third-party lab to ensure compliance. Astera Labs only uses pharmaceutical-grade ingredients on their tablets, 0 THC, and made in the USA. And their unscented body cream has aloe, sunflower oil, and shea butter to protect and moisturize the skin. So let's get with Astera Labs. Right, Gary?
Try Astera Labs safe quality CBD products by shopping at asteralabs.com. That's ASTERRALABS.com. And use code RD20 to receive 20% off your order today.
All right. So here's an interesting global thought. So Giuliani was saying, I didn't violate FARA, but you know who did? Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden was dealing with Ukraine and dealing with China and dealing with these other places. He violated FARA. And this whole thing has turned into a little bit of an indictment of Hunter Biden. And so here might be a rationale or, I don't know, global conspiracy, or maybe the reason Trump didn't pardon Giuliani. The Hunter Biden laptop thing came about, and it came about at a very critical time of the election. And, you know, you have to really think about the optics. The optics were Trump basically is a syndicate. It's him, it's his kids, it's his Jared Kushner, it's his, if that's his name, his brother-in-law, his son-in-law. It's a little cabal of folks that rip people off, and now they're trying to rip off the American taxpayer. And he's involved with Ukraine. He's involved with Russia. He's involved with China. So basically the Trump narrative was, this guy's a corrupt businessman. He's traveling around taking graft from all these different, you know, these corrupt governments from around the world and enriching his family. All right, that's a and he's a racist, but this is the basically now you got Joe Biden. Joe Biden, he's from Delaware. He takes the Amtrak in every day. He's just lunch pail Joe. Picks up his lunch pail, goes to work. Tragically lost his first wife and son or daughter, I can't recall, in a car accident. This guy's
daughter and both of his sons were injured.
Right.
And most recently lost his son to brain cancer.
Right. This guy is just a sort of blue-collar politician, just a regular Joe, pardon the pun. So do you want the guy who's basically the head of the Gambino crime syndicate running the country, or do you want the regular guy who loves his family and loves this country from Delaware, takes the train? Well, then the Hunter...
I'll tell you, it was clear to, I think, anybody who was observing that the last person in the world that Donald Trump wanted to run against was Joe Biden, for precisely the fact that Joe Biden's appeal to certain demographic groups that Trump had kind of peeled off from Hillary Clinton. That the fear was those demographics were going to go right back to Joe Biden.
So then you have this situation, and you have Beau, the older son. Beau was the older son who died of cancer, right? Get that right? Yeah, Beau.
Yeah, Beau.
Okay.
Beau was the Attorney General of Delaware, who was friendly with Kamala.
Served this country, and, you know, cut down long before in his prime. All right, so you got a real strong narrative going. And with Biden, he's not offering solutions. He's not really saying, here's my platform. He's not really saying anything other than, I am not this corrupt asshole, essentially, who's been bought and paid for, all over the country, all over the world with his corrupt dealings. All right. Unfortunately, then there's this Hunter Biden situation. Well, Hunter Biden is going to Ukraine and is going to China and is flying on Air Force Two and is hammering checks and is getting put on boards of companies he has no business being on the boards of and enriching himself. And then there's a bunch of information about you got to kick 10% over to the big guy who's allegedly Joe Biden, and you got to take. So all of a sudden this theme starts emerging that, hey, regular lunch pail Joe Biden who takes the Amtrak, seems like you got a family that's traveling around using your name, enriching themselves. And this is a very critical part of the election. And the media, who's all in Biden's back pocket, just basically says, we're not talking about this. Squash it. Get rid of it. And then,
well, remember, they kept talking. Rudy especially kept talking about his October surprise.
right. And then they find an actual laptop. And Trump had to be going out of his mind at this point. Like, okay, we're 5 weeks from the election. They now have a laptop. There's all this information on it, all these horrible pictures of hookers and crack pipes and everything else. And the New York Post runs the story, and it gets pulled off of Twitter, and it gets shut down for disinformation. So then big tech essentially colludes to crush the laptop story, which is really exactly what happened. The New York Post put it up, and it got taken down. And it got no traction because by this time we were in the home stretch of the election, and I believe most of the powers that be, New York Times, LA Times, CNN, where they needed to bring it home for Biden, and this laptop story was pesky to them.
Well, the problem, I thought, from the thing that is opposed to reporting that takes you to conspiracy theory is, why would the Delaware, whatever I want to call this shop that supposedly the laptop was dropped off at, how does that guy get it to Rudy Giuliani's lawyer, get the laptop there? That always seemed suspicious to me in terms of the provenance of it, if you will. The other thing.
Well, let me address that. I think it seems fishy, and it seems underhanded, and it seems suspicious. I'm with you all the way around, but it still doesn't mean the stuff on the laptop isn't accurate.
Well, from a legal standpoint, if you don't, I'll give you an example people can talk about. I remember a case involving a celebrity who's now passed, so I won't mention her name, but she was in a beef with her ex, and the ex calls the police and says, she's doing coke. It's at the house. Go to the house. They go to the house and find the coke. Well, they can't prosecute that because they can't prove the constructive possession. Even if it's at the house, the guy's calling it up, the guy's got bias, and the guy's got a motive to fabricate. So similarly here, is there a motive to fabricate? Is there a not a good provenance of the laptop? Could that be why the FBI didn't take it? Because maybe the FBI thought that it was suspicious in the field. One of the questions I'd like to know is, did the agents make the decision not to take a hard drive on their own, or did they consult with a assistant United States attorney who was supervising the search, which they almost always do, because you have to have a U.S. attorney normally to take the warrant to a judge to have it executed or signed, and then you give it to the FBI to execute. And did somebody suspect that your very theory that this whole thing was contrived as kind of a, what would you call it, a poison pill, so to speak, and that they didn't want to be part of a poison pill or a Trojan horse style setup?
Well, it's interesting because Hunter Biden has done a bunch of interviews where he basically says, I have no recollection of the laptop. Maybe I dropped it off. Maybe I didn't drop it off. But if it was stolen from his house, he would probably have a recollection of it. Well,
I think a lot of these questions or speculation is going to be answered at some point, because there is clearly a Hunter Biden investigation out of DOJ. There clearly is a Rudy Giuliani investigation out of DOJ. At some point, there is either going to be a case or a declination of the case.
Well,
and
yeah, Well, because the first thing out of Giuliani's mouth is, I got the Hunter Biden hard drive and they wanted nothing to do with it. Not, I'm innocent, or not, this is a miscarriage of justice. The first thing is Hunter Biden. My theory is that Trump is driven insane, that the media and a lot of the departments, FBI and places, DOJ and all that, have ostensibly ignored this thing that in his mind, if this was Don Jr.'s laptop, they'd be going insane over it. And I believe certainly CNN would be going insane if this was Don Jr.'s laptop versus Hunter's laptop. They wouldn't be saying nothing to see here. And I also believe Twitter never would have taken down. Let's do a little thought experiment. What if the New York Post had done an expose on Don Jr.'s laptop? Do you think Twitter would have canceled their account? I do not believe that in a second. So I think Trump is obsessed with this. It probably drives him nuts. And
well, I don't disagree. He must be out of his head that he's lost his Twitter platform, because I've seen basically he's kind of faded off into somewhat obscurity as opposed to being a constant presence. And one of the reasons for that is he's emailing statements. Well, who's going to pick up on that? I mean, they kind of they don't get a whole lot of traction anywhere. And that has to be frustrating. Part of what he always felt he had was this ability to circumvent traditional media and just go directly to a audience by way of his tweets.
So he had the big October surprise, him and Giuliani. That was probably the laptop, and it turned out to be nothing.
There was nothing else that I thought came out or that has come out since that would have been a game changer. And that laptop story, as you said, got no attention whatsoever. I mean,
right.
And as opposed to going, look, you and I have disagreed on interpretations. You've been right, and I've conceded on several of them on these theories. I just think that the provenance of it, as I've said, with some guy in Delaware just makes very little sense to me. It just doesn't ring true.
I agree. I agree in principle, but then ostensibly we'd hear a lot of stories about that guy being investigated and the feds showing up to his shop and they found nothing, or they realized that he had a long history of doing this kind of stuff or something. I hadn't heard any of those stories either, which seems a little weird, because if they vetted him, or if they went and said, we don't believe you, we want to come over to your shop, we want your information, we want security camera stuff, we want receipts, we want dates, we want all this stuff, and then turned out when they tried to vet him, he didn't pass muster, I haven't heard that story, which makes me a little suspicious that they didn't check into it. But either way, for some reason, it just keeps coming back to that Hunter Biden laptop thing, and it never getting traction. And Giuliani is now trying to give it traction. I do think it's an interesting ploy, and I'd love to know if he had it as a sort of, not a get out of jail free card,
it's a poison pill. It's kind of like you're going to throw my favorite expression from a judge I love dearly, who's now off the bench. She used to call it the turd in the punch bowl.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let me hit Geico here. Do you rent your home? Well, sure you do. And I bet it's hard work. Well, you want something that's easy? How about bundling those policies with Geico? Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. So what do? You go to geico.com, you get a quote, you see just how much you could be saving when you bundle at Geico. That's geico.com. Last subject, I drove past Tinhorn Flats 2 days ago. I saw that not only was it fenced, but they had the post buried in the cement. Like, this was not some sort of temporary stuff you'd put on during a parade or something. This is literally 8 foot high, and somebody got a roto hammer or a coring drill and literally went down into the concrete. This was no cheap and easy temp barrier, as previously discussed. This is a real permanent fencing.
It's a permanent taking.
Right.
And the interesting thing is going to be, on another case today, I don't want to reveal anything, but we talked about with the Attorney General, the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual. Can you have a taking in the sense of, because we've alleged that in some other cases. And this, to me, is the perfect example of an Eighth Amendment taking, a Fifth Amendment, basically inverse condemnation. We're hoping to we're going to file, give you a coming attraction. We are hoping to get into court 3 weeks from today to dissolve it and seek sanctions against the city of Burbank. And sanctions meaning not only did you misuse the restraining order, but yeah. You know what else is interesting about this?
They're literally.
I think is this a video from a Saturday morning, Gary?
I believe so, yeah.
They're literally dispatched a construction crew, and they're coring into the sidewalk, which, by the way, you're sort of defacing the sidewalk now. Like, you gotta patch it. It's always going to look weird and patched. They're going to do a shit job of patching it eventually when it comes off. But yeah.
And the cynic in me says they had the Friday night before that Saturday 7 a.m. crew was out there. They had an open public forum about Tinhorn Flats with the city council to decide what they were going to do, which didn't end until, I don't know, 9 or 10 o'clock at night, right?
Right.
Somehow, magically, that crew was out there the next morning at 7 o'clock doing all that. Isn't that an incredible feat? I mean, I couldn't get a crew if I called up at 11 o'clock at night to come out the following morning at 7 o'clock to do construction work. But boy, the city of Burbank has got some great. So
they'd already decided and already scheduled it. So does
theater?
Do they own the property? The family?
No. I think I don't want to speak out of school, but I think Barrett's ex does. But
it's not. They're not leasing it or renting it from.
They are leasing. So that's yet another issue here, because you've got a situation where they've interfered with the leasehold. At some point, some judge or jury is going to have to grapple with what's happened here. I mean, I understand that we're still in the period under the COVID Constitution, but as we open up more and more, and we realize we've been hoodwinked to the extent that these efforts were not driven by data or science, but were driven by political considerations, and that's become apparent. And for those of you who want to tweet at me that I don't know what I'm talking about, I've got the transcripts. We have the depositions of the so-called experts, and we've got declarations by the so-called experts. And I defy you to point to, in either the under oath questioning or in the declarations, where the data was that supported the outdoor and the violations of equal protection, the violations of due process, all the things that people apparently in America are willing, we're still living in a suspension of the writ of habeas corpus in California. The people don't seem to really care about that. So I understand that people always want to denigrate somebody who says the emperor has no clothes. But in this case, many of these decisions were purely politically driven. There is no other explanation for why an outdoor restaurant like the Angela Marsden's would be shut down 25 feet away from a Hollywood production. There's no other explanation why my restaurant in downtown LA is shut down, but I could get in the car, drive straight down Wilshire to the Grove and I could take food and eat in large white circles. There's no other explanation for why all of a sudden after lobbyists were paid that certain restrictions were switched and certain people were deemed essential, certain others were not. So, and when you question the experts as to what evidence, and they just make up stuff like, well, I mean, my favorite was today, one of the things that was said to me today was, well, people, when they're at a restaurant, they tend to be there and they laugh and they yell and they sing outdoors. But if they go, I said, well, okay, I don't necessarily agree with that, but how are you any safer if you limit your party to 6 people outdoors at a restaurant in 90 minutes, which most jurisdictions had enough sense to do, as opposed to mixing 100 or 200 strange households in a Costco where they're sitting in there for the same hour or 90 minutes. Don't tell me people run in to Costco and spend 8 minutes and then run out. So that makes no sense whatsoever. And there is no, we've now determined, by the way, Adam, you and I text back and forth. It doesn't seem like a day goes by that some public health expert doesn't say, we've now known for a long time that the viral loads can't gather outside and that there's very little risk of transmission outside. How many times have we seen that in the last month and a half? What you and I have been saying, obviously, or back at the horse trail in April of 2020. I mean, people, it was a crisis. It still is a crisis, but you have been lied to.
Oh, you've definitely been lied to, and it kind of continues. Like even fully vaccinated, everyone, Joe Biden's wearing a mask, Kamala Harris wearing a mask, Nancy Pelosi, they're all masked up and fully vaccinated. What is your agenda here? And
well, it says I saw some guidance which actually said to show solidarity. You know, what's actually more compelling to me, if you want people to wear the mask, tell them what I've discovered here. Since I've been not wearing my mask outside and it's allergy season, my allergies have flared up. So I now kind of wear the mask a little bit outside because it's helpful for allergies. I mean, that's the practical matter as to why I wear the mask. And I was talking to a friend of mine who, she was the one who had actually put that thought in my head. And I said, man, that's a smart thought. And we've also noticed that the flu has come down dramatically and flu hospitalizations. So, you know, look, all we had to do was suspend the writ of habeas corpus, seize people's properties and destroy businesses and give away billions of dollars to try to restore the economy, which you and I aren't going to have to worry about it, but our kids and our grandkids will.
All right.
On that
a positive,
note.
Negative note to go out on. You guys, probably a couple tickets left to the Late Show for me in Appleton, Wisconsin, coming up this Saturday at Skyline Comedy Club. And then we go to Jam in the Van, which is out here in Los Angeles, May 22nd. We perform outside. We'll do a live pod there. You go to amcarolla.com for all the live shows and channel 687 on our Pluto TV channel. You can watch all the chassis media stuff. What do you got, Mark?
We've got Prova. I'm here in New York City. Prova in Times Square is open. Prova in the Grand Central Terminal is open. Capri in Southampton opens as we are dropping tomorrow, Saturday. You stop by there. The hotel is open. I'll even throw in a complimentary breakfast. Go out to Casa Tropicana in San Clemente or stop by Gigi's or Elixir at the V Hotel and say hi to the gang there.
Oh, we got a YouTube plug. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, subscribe to the Reasonable Doubt YouTube channel at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast. You can get the full Saturday show, and that's the only place to get video versions of Beyond a Reasonable Doubt.
So, until next time, Adam Crow for Mark Garrigus saying, mahalo.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Tune in next Saturday for an all-new episode.